If we move in together after 6 months, is it too fast and would it kill the relationship?
Well, ideally you should vet longer, but I mean, I've always lived with my girlfriends that I've had over the course of my life, my serious long-term relationships. We always end up living together. And I've dated internationally, and obviously you go to her country or she'd come to mine. It's like we're staying in each other's places. So you learn a lot really quickly about a person when you live with them, whether or not you can exist together. Because that's a big part of what a long-term relationship is like. It's like once the infatuation, the honeymoon period is worn off, is can you live together? Do you really enjoy being in the same house together? Are you a good team? Do you get along? Does she keep the house clean? Do you keep it clean? Or is, one of the people just stacking up dirty dishes in the sink or spitting toothpaste all over the sink bowl in the bathroom, and you go in there and it's like fucking everywhere. There's hair everywhere, or,
Products.
beard trimmings or eyelashes that have been plucked or hair that's been plucked and cut and mascara all over the place. I had a girlfriend once, and she was hot, probably the most beautiful woman I've ever dated in my life. And she put the mascara on pretty good, but it was like it would get everywhere. It was all over my fucking rugs. It'd be stuck in my countertop. It's like I don't know what she was doing when she'd be putting her makeup on, but it's like the shit would be everywhere. And I'm a clean guy. I'm a neat freak, and so that kind of gets annoying, especially when it gets in your rugs and stuff, because it's stuff's greasy and it stains and it makes a mess. But the biggest thing about relationships is like long-term ones where you're living with somebody is it's just about existing together, getting up every day, using the bathroom, sleeping together, eating together, traveling together, doing family things together, because your families get all intermixed and you got to spend time with her family and your family, and otherwise somebody feels left out or whatever. And can you enjoy one another? Can you have fun? And so I've done both. I've done it where we moved in right away because it's just the logistics of things, especially when you date international, and I've done it where we dated for a long time before we lived and moved together. I know there's some stats that, especially talk about people that like live together a long time and then they get married and then within a year or two they're divorced. And I remember an old friend of mine that I used to work with when I was in Orlando back in real estate. And he and his girlfriend, after he got divorced and she had left her fiance for the two of them to be together, they were single and lived together for many years. He had 2 kids from his previous marriage, and I don't think he never ended up having any kids with her. She was younger, and but I don't think they didn't get married for almost a decade. And so they lived together for a long time, and then they finally got married, and they've been together, I don't know, 25 years, I think, at this point. So it's some stats say that it won't work out if you live together. Other stats, I mean, if you ever read that book, How to Lie Through with Statistics, I think it's quite frankly, when they do public opinion polls or surveys, it's by how you phrase the question, you can pretty much get any kind of response that you want. Like one of the guys, he was saying yesterday, he's like, I've seen the numbers, and the average person in America, the average man has slept with 7 girls his whole life, and the average woman has only been with 4 men her whole life. It's like, well, if you're going to get data from their whole lives, then that means everybody in the study is dead at this point. So what was that? The study started in the early 1900s. It's like, what about from like the 1950s and 60s where you had the sexual revolution up to where it is now? And, I'm dealing with people from all over the globe and every cultural and spiritual and religious background. And when you just think about the average girl these days that becomes sexually active in freshman year in high school, it's not because she's just sleeping with half the school, even though some girls do. It's just she's dating and looking for love and inexperienced. She's a kid and she gets her first sexual experiences. And typically, like I know what I saw when I went to a Catholic high school, it's most of the girls, until they got, some of them would, start dating a guy and they would stay together and they got married. But I think it was maybe 2 or 3 out of our class that met somebody in school, started dating like sophomore or junior year, and they lived happily ever after. There was like 2 or 3 of them total. But the majority of them, it's throughout the year, they would date 2 or 3 different guys. And if, like we talked about in other videos, most guys are good for a few weeks. And if the average woman is sleeping with a guy by the second or third date, usually what happens is she feels good enough to sleep with them because it feels like it's going to turn into a relationship. It feels like it's progressing like this beautiful love story. And then oftentimes when the guy's emotions get engaged and he really starts caring, then he starts chasing, calling, pursuing too much, trying too hard. He gets a little needy and a little neurotic, gets fearful that it's not going to work out. And then he literally chases her right out of his life and turns her off to the point where oftentimes she just ghosts him and doesn't want to talk to him anymore. She's so turned off and so unattracted at that point. And that's typically what happens. And it's because, most guys do not have more masculine energy than the average woman. And so if you figure from the time a girl starts having sex when she's a freshman and until she graduates college, that's 8 years, 2 to 3 guys that she dates and sleeps with a year. I mean, there's 25, 30 dudes right there. And it sounds like a big number, but you're like, 2 to 3 total per year, that's not really a lot. So, it's pretty easy to stack a lot of bodies. And so for this guy that's in the comments saying that, it's like I don't know where, he didn't post any of the links or any of the numbers to that, but like, I look at that and I go, that's absurd. I don't know where you got, maybe that might have been true for people born in 1900. But the other thing that's interesting is that when you look at how often people are having sex based on their demographic, like when they were born, and what you notice is like my generation up through kids who were born in the 90s, and then it kind of levels off into the early 2000s that a good percentage, men and women, were having sex. And what's interesting is women having sex, it's kind of consistent. It's kind of like a flat line, basically. So the same number of women are having sex, but what's really interesting is that when you compare the men versus, of today, like the, not the millennials, but the Gen Z, the younger, especially 18, 20-year-old, 22-year-old, 25-year-old, the guys that are, when you look at the amount of, because the question was, how many, or have you been having sex in the past 12 months or something like that? And so they look at the average guy, especially the younger guy, there's a significant drop-off in the curve to men these days. It's like, it's really, I think it's like 2/3 different. So it's like 60% less of the guys today are having sex than dudes that were born just, in the 90s, in my generation and before that. And so, but the women are still having the same amount of sex. It's just a big portion, 2/3 of guys are basically not getting any pussy. And so you can look at that and you go, well, obviously it's Chad Thundercock. It's got to be cleaning up. You look at the dating apps, and the reality is 20% of the dudes are sleeping with 80% of the women that are on there. And so that would make sense. It's like the younger guys today are not having as much sex, but the girls are still pretty much, they're always getting laid at pretty much the same level for all these decades. The only thing that's changed is the guys who say they've had sex in the last 12 months. It's like, I think it goes through like 27, 28 in that age range. It's a significant drop-off, which was surprising to me. But then it would make sense, especially as guys have become more effeminate and girly and space out playing video games, or they're overweight, or they just have no, a lot of them don't even, like we were talking about Chunky's little brother, and he doesn't really have any ambition to get his driver's license, does he? But you were like, I can't wait to get it and get the fuck out of here. And so you're seeing that a lot too, is that like when you look at the ages that people get their driver's licenses, like that's not a big deal for them. Whereas like when I was growing up, it's a big deal to get your driver's license so you can have your independence and get a car and go visit your friends and go do things, go get a job, that kind of thing. And, this latest demographic of dudes is just like, they're behind. They have no ambition. They're not really trying to make anything happen. But the girls are still getting their freak on. 2/3 of the guys, the younger generation, are not. They are not having sex. And they also, some of the other questions, like, they don't even seem to give a shit. They don't give a shit about getting a driver's license. It's like there's no ambition.
Yeah, how are you going to go out and do things and find more ambitious things to do if you're just sitting at home?
Or how are you going to be able to drive a girl to places?
Yeah, she's going to come
They're
pick you
just
up.
not even dating or participating at all.
They're playing with each other's dinglings.
They're on their phones. They're playing video games. They're in the chat rooms. They're in the red pill communities complaining about modern women. Meanwhile, Chad Thundercock he's got more work these days than he did in my generation. He's got a heavier workload.
He's got a girlfriend.
But the ladies are still getting fucked left and right, like they always have been. It's just by fewer guys.
Gosh, you got to speak up. Get yourself out there. But be protected.
Ultimately, answering the question, it's case-by-case basis. If I've done it both ways. So put your big boy pants on and make up your own mind. If you're going to get married and you want to involve the government in your marriage, or you want to get serious and have kids, it's best to date for at least 2 years. And if things are going really well and you guys want to live together, you're going to find out really quickly whether or not you can tolerate this person or not.
Me personally, 6 months is too quick to move in. For me, I would say at least 1.5 years or 2, if anything.
Even if the girl lives at home with her parents or has her own place, it's like, after a couple of months of dating and she's in love, she's at your house pretty much every night anyways. And sometimes you're going to be at her place, but in my experience, it's like, girl's always there.
At least for some friends of mine, it's worked out. Like my best friend who lives in Orlando, he was with his girlfriend for, actually, as a matter of fact, I think less than 6 months before they actually moved out. But the reason why they had to move out was because they were graduating from college and his girlfriend's lease at the dorm where she was staying, or the apartment where she was staying, was going to be up. And it was either, at least in South Florida, the rent is very high in a lot of places. And so it was either, like, the only option she really had was to move back
with her parents.
With her parents. And she would be in, she lived in Tampa before coming to school in South Florida. And for him, it was like he didn't want to lose her. He didn't want to do long distance relationships. So he had strict parents too. His parents were pretty strict too. So he literally put on his big boy pants and moved in with her. Moved into an apartment. Then I would say, I think it's been almost 2 years after they moved into a house just recently.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. It worked out pretty well for them.